Welcome to Python in a Nutshell, a series that teaches you useful and important parts of Python in short, easy to understand videos. In this episode, we'll be looking at Python's data classes module. The first example we'll look at is the most simple form of data class. In this instance, the constructor is called with no arguments on a class, and we have the fields name and age. If we create a person out of this class with the parameters John and 30 and print it, we'll get this simple data class with the name John and the age 30. As you can see, data classes has removed a lot of boilerplate that we would have required, for example, an initialization function and a repr function, and has generated that all for us with code generation. If we run this, we should see the desired output here. Next, we'll move on to frozen data classes. Frozen data classes are useful if you want an immutable structure. This is, you can't edit it once it has been created. To do this time we'll call the constructor with arguments. Frozen equals true. Now, if we again create a person with this frozen data class with the parameters John and 30, it will create the same object as before, but this time, if we were to try to assign a new variable, for example, adding 1 to the age, we'll get an error because we're not allowed to change this immutable argument, as you can see here. Next, we'll move on to defaults in data classes. Here, we've set the name by default to John and the age by default to 30. If we create this data class without given arguments and print it, this will still work. This is useful because sometimes you want some arguments to be provided by default and some arguments to be provided by the user. Next, we'll look at fields. The reason we use fields is to prevent the issues that can be caused by mutable default arguments. If you provide a default argument which is mutable, for example, a list or dictionary, when modifying this argument, it will update across all instances of the class, which is undesirable behavior. To get around this, we'll use fields. In this instance, we're using the default factory of list for the hobbies field. This means that every time the data class is instantiated, this default factory function will be called. As you can see here, it creates an object like we've seen before with the hobbies as an empty list, which is created by this default factory. If we provide our own, however, that will be used instead of the default factories. Next, we'll move on to keyword-only arguments. Again, we're going to use arguments in the constructor of the data class this time. Keyword-only equals true. In this instance, name and age must be provided as keywords in the data class, as you can see from this function signature. Otherwise, it will raise an error. Again, this will create a person as we've looked at through this episode. Finally, we'll look at slots. Slots are a way of only allowing specific attributes on the data class. If we put slots equals true in the constructor here, we can see name and age. And in this no slots data class, it looks almost identical. However, slots drastically reduces the size of the object. In this instance with slots, we're giving it the name John and the age 30, and printing the size of that object makes it 129 bytes. However, when we use the one with no slots, we get 338 bytes of size. That's it for this episode. I hope it was useful to you, and there will be more episodes coming in the future with more parts of Python.